Hey guys, this is Vernier for cardrunners.com, and I'm bringing you the introduction to crushing the micros, updated for 2013. A lot of people have asked me on the forums or through PMs whether the original series that I made in 2008 is still relevant. And I think a lot of elements of that series are still going to be helpful in beating the micro stakes, but having reviewed some of it myself recently, I know that it could definitely use a facelift. There's definitely elements of it that need to be updated. So I sat down and I thought about what are the elements necessary to be able to beat the micros these days. I define the micros as, I guess, as low as 2 NL all the way up to 25 NL, although this series will deal with 50 NL as well. I think 50 NL is you're starting to move into small stakes, but certainly everything that we talked about in this series is going to be applicable to small stakes as well. By far, the most important thing in your game is going to be opening ranges, and the reason for that is it's the decision that you need to automate. But a lot of people have leaks in the kind of hands they open. So we're going to spend, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on that. The other reason for that is I found that a lot of tricky turn and river spots can be boiled down to, well, basically, a lot of people get themselves in trouble on turns and rivers due to their opening ranges pre-flop. So like I said, we'll spend quite a bit of time on that. Ranges facing a razor. So basically someone opens before you and you've got the decision of either 3-betting or calling or obviously folding. That's another area that actually I think people have much bigger leaks in that than they do with opening ranges. And we'll put a special emphasis on the button, small blind, big blind dynamics because it's such a unique situation. You know, when you're playing three-handed or the first 3 people fold and you get down to be three-handed, I think ranges becomes much looser. Obviously, understandably, people get much more aggressive. So this is an area that I think a lot of people have trouble with, mostly because the ranges become fairly weak post-flop, just because you need to defend so much. You need to steal with a much wider range, and people defend with a much wider range. So 3-bet pots, both as the aggressor, as someone who's facing a 3-bet pot, and this should probably be 3-bet plus pots because this is going to deal with 4-bet pots and 5-betting, all that good stuff. Post-flop dynamics, a lot of that's going to be built into some of the previous topics, but we'll lay out a little bit of theory and give some examples as when you're the pre-flop raiser or when you're the pre-flop caller. We're going to use Hold'em Manager to work on your game. This is something that I use extensively, and I think is a tool that people, it looks like I'm going to fix it. We're not going to use Hold'em Manger. There we go, Hold'em Manager. This is a piece of software that people are not comfortable using themselves in terms of finding leaks in their game. So hopefully through this series, this is something that's going to become a more valuable tool to you. Bluffing, there's not, you're much better off just playing fairly straightforward at the micros, but it doesn't mean that there's not good opportunities to bluff. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about the mental game. This is something that the more volume you put in and the more tables you play and the higher you move up, it becomes more and more important. So through all this, we're going to use live action videos of me playing. We're going to use leak finders of other people playing and me commenting on them, and database analysis, both my database and hopefully some of your guys' database. If you are interested in being a part of this video or this series in any way, just shoot me a PM. Check out my blog. I've written some details, and we're gonna talk about lots more. So if you take a look at this overview and you find anything that I missed, just shoot me an email or a private message. So today I want to talk about unopened pots from early position and middle position. In general, as far as opening, I like to stay pretty tight early on. I wrote here many variables, which means that when it's unopened to you from and you are in early position, there's 5 players left to act, which means that they have 10 cards between them, and a lot of different things can happen. So it's the situation that is most complex in terms of possibilities. Also, if you raise, you are most likely to see a flop when you raise from early position. You are most likely to be out of position. And those two things combine to mean that you're going to have pretty good hands. And I will talk about what I mean by having pretty good hand strength in a little bit. Now, when you're in late position, there's many fewer variables. So, for example, when you're in the small blind, there's only 1 player left to act. Or if you're on the button, there's 2 players left to act. They have fewer cards in between them, which means that it's much less likely that those 2 cards are cards that they're willing to play. And when it's just like, when you're in the small blind and there's the big blind left to act, you have a pretty good idea of their kind of tendencies, how tight they are, how frequently they 3-bet, how often they defend. You can just control for a lot more things. And when you open from the cutoff and the button, you're much more likely to be in position and much less likely to see any kind of flop. So because of that, you don't need hands that are as strong. So I'm sure all you guys know this general idea of playing tight early and playing loose late, but I still don't think people appreciate just how important this is. So moving on to early position, middle position opening range, I broke it down into hands that I will always open, usually open, sometimes open, and seldom open. Now, I guess under seldom, there are times when I'll open King 8 suited from early position, but there's no reason to include that as seldom, just because it's not a hand that I open. It's a hand that I probably open less than 5% of the time, so I'm just not going to go into it. But all pocket pairs, very strong suited broadways, and some of the stronger offsuit broadways are hands that I'm always going to be opening. Suited aces I usually open. Some of these weaker suited connectors and offsuit broadways I'll open sometimes, and as you can see, there's some of these suited one gappers, like suited medium one gappers and etc. I'll open seldom. So I have a range of ranges that I open from early and middle position. So this is more of like my early position opening range. From middle position, I would say the green stuff becomes always, and the blue stuff becomes usually. Like, it's very rare that I don't open ace-10 offsuit from middle position, but there certainly are times when I don't do it. So now that you have kind of a general idea of the kind of opening ranges that I have, I want to talk about adjusting that opening range. So I would say by default, the green stuff is what I open, 85% of the time. Green stuff in green and orange, 85% of the time from early position. But I adjust. So I tighten up when there are players with a high 3-bet percentage in the cutoff and the button. So hands like ace-6 suited, I usually just tend to fold in those situations. When there's short stackers in the blinds, basically, if people are going to be calling, short stackers are going to be shoving, and then I'm opening and I'm folding a lot. So usually when there's short stackers in the blinds and regulars that are going to have position on me, I just pitch some of my weaker hands, and I tend to loosen up when there are tight regulars who don't 3-bet much in late position. So for anyone that has a VPIP of under 19, for the most part, I will have, like, if I'm in early position, I'll open my middle position range, or if I'm in middle position, I'll open my cutoff range. And it really helps to have loose passive players in the blinds. And so if I've got loose passives in the blinds, I'm going to be opening wider because I'm more likely to be heads up with them with position, and I'm going to be able to make better decisions. So now I want to look at a couple of hands where I ended up playing either looser or tighter and describe the table conditions that made me either loosen my range or tighten my range. So here is a first kind of a non-standard open for me. Couple of reasons for that. As you can see, there's a 79-43 player in the cutoff. Versus a player like that, I am going to be looking to get involved with a wide range of hands. Having a suited king with a fairly good kicker to where I can still make a straight. I can get very good trips and make a high flush. Certainly going to be looking to open that. Small blind does not seem like a player who's going to be squeezing that light. GGFML, he also doesn't seem too aggressive. I mean, he's got pretty solid stats, but that's a position that he's least likely to be 3-betting me light from. So I'm not too worried about him. The button seems kind of like a touristy, kind of has touristy stats on the tighter side. So yeah, basically I'm going to be looking to play this hand against the cutoff and maybe even the button. So I open it up. It kind of goes the way I thought it would. The cutoff calls, flop top pair with a good kicker. I bet he calls. I'm just going to keep betting. I'm going to assume that my pair is good. I can probably bet a little bit more on that turn, but yeah, I mean, I'm just going to keep. I'll probably bet the river if it comes to playing to go for multiple streets of value there. Here's hand number 2, ace-6 suited. This is a open for me most of the time in an early position, but I've got the kind of a shorter stack on the button who's 3-betting 10% of hands. We have a player in the small blind who is 3-betting 10% of hands. The big blind is a tight player. So he's going to be folding quite frequently if it comes around to him. Looks like there's a player in the cutoff who seems like a weaker player, but very often if he calls, the button or small blind are going to be 3-betting. So this is a marginal spot at best, and I just end up folding here, and I think that's a good play. Here's 5-7 suited. It's a hand that I open seldom under the gun. We've got two players here. So first of all, the both middle position and cutoff players are on the tighter side. They have not been gaining out of hand 3-betting, so middle position has yet to 3-bet. Or I should say middle position has 3-bet 2% of the time, and cutoff's yet to 3-bet. We've got this player playing 50 VPIP on the button, and another one playing 43 VPIP in the small blind. And finally, the big blind is not someone who's been squeezing a lot. So I am looking to play 7-5 suited versus the small blind for sure. Versus the button, I think I'm going to be able to navigate quite a few flops. This guy, the button, also folds to a lot of C-bets. So he's folded to 78% of 3-bets. So yeah, basically I think this is going to be a profitable open. I'm going to be able to play it against the weaker players, and the regulars are not going to be getting out of hand. So I end up opening it, get called by both of the players that I want to have in the pot, and I get 3-bet. This might be a misclick by Alex Black. He seems to be a fairly good player, and it just I can't imagine that he would. This would be a standard play for him. So I think he misclicks. There's really no play other than calling here. I think 3-betting just makes no sense since I want to play this hand against the 2 weaker players. And if I was to 4-bet, I might force them out and isolate myself against the reg. I don't want to do that. So I do end up calling and everybody calls. So perfect. I'll have position on 2 of the players with a hand that's going to be fairly easy to play post-flop. I'm going to be able to play fit or fold. And that is it's not a flop that I want. The turn is a 10, and I just end up folding. So definitely playing fit or fold, but the dynamics of that made that for an open. So finally, here's a spot where pocket deuces I almost always open. So I should say, other than aces, kings, and queens, and ace king, there are times when I'm going to fold a hand that I have as an open. So if you look at these dynamics, so this is a rush table, and we've got players who 3-bet respectively 11%, 12%, 7%, 10%, and 20% of our small sample size. So lots of very loose, very aggressive players when it comes to 3-betting. All of them are regulars. I just think that when I open this hand at this table, at some point I'm going to get 3-bet. I'm probably going to have to fold, and I'm not going to like that. So in addition to that, I think, unless I hit a set, if I hit a set, I don't know if I'm going to get paid off enough. So all these things combined to me just folding this hand and getting a better table. So the last thing that I want to leave you with is I picked out 4 different hands that I think are, fundamentally different from one another. A mid-suited connector, 2 offsuit broadways, small pocket pair, and a suited ace. And I generated, looks like 8 random flops using Flopzilla. And this is a pretty good exercise for anybody to go through, is think about how you would play each of these hands on each of these flops versus one other player. In position or out of position, kind of, what are the variables that you would look for based on their stats, based on what positions they called from, et cetera, et cetera. So think about whether betting each flop would be a good idea, and if you decide to continue either by checking or by betting, what is your plan for the turn? So it's a pretty good exercise to go through away from the tables to help you think about ranges, help you think about different lines. So I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions or comments about the series or about this video in general, just let me know, and good luck at the tables.